Hey, does Mr. Unprepared here, does somebody have a pen? Social hour. Social hour.
Sorry.
Sir?
How's your little guy? How's your little guy? Is he good?
Alrighty, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our 2023 start of the school year. Can't believe it's already that time again. So we're into the mix of things. So, all right, we will go ahead and call the meeting to order here at 5:02. And if you will go ahead and stand with us, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Jones, you want to kick us off?
I pledge allegiance. With liberty and justice for all.
Someone changed
Oops.
it.
Yeah. I thought we added some new words to the Pledge of Allegiance. I was like, oh.
Well, I think there is an etiquette for the way the flags. Okay, well, I'm sure there's a Colorado pledge, but we meant to pledge to the United States flag, so
We have the right
I was kind of wondering why you're,
We're good.
okay. All righty. All right, we will, Dr. Schultes is remote tonight, so everybody knows the full board is here. So, Dr. Hill, you want to kick us off on our staffing update?
All right, so, and this will be a short update. It's really just an update on staffing around our org chart. We'll have a more comprehensive staffing update at the meeting on the 15th from HR. So real quick, just because we've had some hires that happened in the spring and into the summer with central office staff, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew where everyone landed and what roles they'll be taking on coming into the new school year. And we are excited for a new school year soon. So the first slide, if this works. There it goes. This is the 23-24 org chart for director positions and up, which essentially when folks talk about central administration, that's what we're talking about. So we have a lot of folks that work in central office, grounds crew, custodial, things of that nature that are not central administrators, but these are our central administrators that are director level and up. So on the next slide, this is, I've just highlighted senior leadership team. So when we talk about our senior leadership team, we don't have any changes there. So some consistency at our senior leadership. We have Clint Garcia continue to serve as our Chief Operations Officer, Nikki Jost as our Chief Human Resources Officer, Jen Marsh as our Chief Academic Officer, Mel Trujillo as our Chief Financial Officer, and then Tammy Arrett as our General Counsel who serves both the district and the board. So no changes at our senior level. As far as executive directors go, we have one returning executive director, and that's Mr. Dan Burke. And so he'll continue as our executive director of technology services. And then we have two, again, these are not new positions, but folks that have moved into new roles. And so we know that Ms. Jackie Anderson is moving into the executive director of actually, that should be teaching and learning. That's an old title. And that is a role that was vacated prior, and we didn't backfill it, and we said we would backfill it when we reduced in another area, and so that role has been filled for this coming year. And then Dan Bonello is going to be serving as our Executive Director of Student Services, and I'll talk about each of those departments in a second. And then as far as directors go, so again, returning directors and then new directors, so you can see I won't go through all of them right this second, but our new directors in positions, we have Sharon Callis will be Director of Site Leadership. Remember that we went down to 3 site directors. And so Sharon is going to be our third site director. And then underneath Jackie, we have Ms. Nikki Johnson, who will be our director of secondary curriculum and professional learning. If you remember, we condensed the director of professional learning position, and so professional learning has moved underneath the curriculum and teaching and learning department. And then over on the right, you can see we have two new directors with Ms. Anne Marie Tennyson as our director of special education, joining us from Steamboat. And then I learned today, before that, joining us from Oregon and Wyoming. I think I got that right. And she helped lead the, as a side note, she helped lead the special education in-service we had today, and they did a great job with that. So she's joining us as our SPED director. And then over on the far right, Amy Frazier will be our new director of SEL and behavioral support. And remember, she was our principal at Thunder Mountain Elementary prior to that. So just kind of giving an overview of these different departments. So on the far left, again, Chief Operations Officer, and that's Clint Garcia. He oversees the major departments that he oversees with directors are nutrition services, which Dan Sharp is overseeing that department. Director of Maintenance Operations is Eddie Mort, so all things facilities and making sure that our facilities are running smooth. Lisa Sharp, who oversees all of our contracts purchasing in the warehouse, and then Tim Leon, our Director of Safety. And then obviously, like I said, underneath those, we have folks that are supporting those departments as well. I feel bad as I highlight just the square that has Nikki's name because she doesn't have any directors underneath her. So it may look like Nikki's on her own. They're supporting HR, but she has a team underneath her, but they're not director level and up. So Nikki oversees all things human resources, hiring, retaining staff, benefits, and all those different departments. And so we're happy to have her support as well. I had to highlight a lot of things under Jen because she oversees a lot of different departments. So Chief Academic Officer, again, oversees our site leadership, our site directors, and we have 3 of them, as I mentioned before. We've gone from 4 to 3. And so we have Ari Goldberg, Paul Jaby, and then Sharon Callis is our new site director. And they have divvied up their schools this year for who they're supporting, now that we've gone down to 3. And then also, I know at some point we'll give an update on this, but working with student services, Dan's team has aligned how they're supporting schools as well. So you have almost like a vertical alignment between site directors, folks from student services that are supporting the same campuses so that there's some overlap there and can help with collaboration. And then moving over to the right, again, Jackie Anderson's our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and then underneath her, she oversees, we have curriculum and professional learning, and then we also have Curry Newton returning as our Director of Assessment, so all things testing and assessment, and then Sherry Taylor overseeing our College and Career Readiness Department, and then I already mentioned Mr. Burke with Technology. And then over on the right, Dan is overseeing our Gifted and Talented, so we have Heather returning there. I mentioned Amy Frazier before, our Director of SEL and Behavioral Support. Christy Donathan overseeing our Early Childhood. Tracy overseeing Access and Opportunity, but also we've added Family Partnerships to his role. And he'll also be absorbing some other departments to help support having better family partnerships in our district, which is not only a strategic plan goal, but we have some grant money coming in to help us support that as well. So he'll be still supporting all of our equity inclusion work, but also rolling in the family partnership piece as well. And then I mentioned Anne Marie over special education, and then Karina Montoya oversees our migrant services department, which is a statewide position that we get funding from the state, but she not only supports D51, but she supports other districts in our region as well. So that's all I had on that one. I just wanted to make sure that folks kind of knew where people landed as far as central office administration and who will be supporting what departments. And like I said, next 2 weeks from now, we'll come and bring a comprehensive staffing update as far as where we are with hiring from Nikki and our HR team. Okay. All right. So the next item is an update on our elementary declining enrollment. We haven't had an update on this since June, because remember, our goal is to update the board at every work session, and we didn't have any work sessions in July. So I'm just going to give an overview of what we've covered in the committee meetings since the June work session, and then talk about where we're headed next with the committee, because the committee's not done doing their work. So just a reminder, the resolution that was passed back in March, the board charged us to create a committee to try to address declining enrollment at the elementary level and to put together a committee. And so that's the resolution. And then our charge has been to continue the work that we already started prior to that resolution, review that data that was already presented, acquire additional data if necessary, which we definitely have, study all options, including benefits and ramifications of closing elementary schools, better educate the community on the issues surrounding the enrollment declines and the effects enrollment decline has on the district, and then develop a set of recommendations to address declining in student enrollment to bring back to the board. And remember, the resolution said that needed to be brought back to the board no later than the September business meeting, which would be the 19th. And so we're planning on still doing that. I know I've already shared this with the board before, but our membership, so teachers, administrators, we have folks from different entities in the community. We have parents that serve on there from DAC and Parent Special Education Committee, folks that served on our strategic plan priority action teams, folks that have served on our minority advisory committee, and then we have some of our senior leadership and other leaders in the district to be there to provide information and guidance on where we're heading. I've already gone on this before, but again, we send out updates to the community after our meetings to try to update them on the work that happened at the committee meetings. And then we plan, myself and Paul Jaby and Callie plan weekly on what we're going to discuss at the next committee meeting. And then we put out those updates to the community, and then also update the board at our work sessions. So just to refresh where we've been, the first few meetings that we had back in April and May were really to try to bring this committee together and ground them in the data that we've been presented, but also bring in new data. So we looked at research. We also brought in our demographer and the state demographer and looked at the data. And then we also studied some different models for trying to address declining enrollment, but also looking at what other districts have done around consolidations to try to learn from that process as well. And then in meeting 4, we started looking at different pathways. What are all the pathways that we could try to explore to address this problem? Because what we've been discussing through this process is that just one path is not going to solve the problem for us. We have to look at multiple things. And then the meetings that we've had since I gave the last update. So on the 27th, we had another committee meeting, so I'll go over what we talked about there. We had 3 town halls. 2 were in person, 1 was virtual, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then we had a meeting on the 11th to continue to talk about criteria, and then we'll have a meeting at the, we had a meeting on the 11th. We'll have a meeting, we already had the meeting on the 25th. Gosh, I'm like really turning around. We're already in August, aren't we? We had the meeting on the 25th as well. We have our meeting set for August, and then we have the plan to bring the recommendation back to the board in September. So just a reminder of the problem statement that the committee came up with and developed. Current declining student enrollment negatively impacts D51 resources and infrastructure. The impact limits D51's ability to assemble the critical resources and infrastructure to adequately support and implement the strategic plan. We desire to reallocate resources to create safe, successful classrooms for students and staff. We try to ground ourselves in the strategic plan whenever we meet, with the question around how do we make sure that we're resourcing and staffing and configuring our schools so that we can reach the goals and equip the schools to be able to reach the goals within our strategic plan. So we have our graduate profile. How do we make sure that we have culturally connected, creative problem solvers, and ready for career and life students? And how do we make sure that we're providing the right resources to our buildings to be able to do that? I won't go through the full strategic plan, but y'all know our our focus area is around having prepared and supported students. How do we make sure that we are properly resourcing our buildings to be able to meet these goals? How do we make sure that we have prepared and supported staff through this process? And then how do we make sure we're also reaching the goals around having engaged and supported community partners, reaching these goals as well, especially the middle priority area around having transparent and effective resource allocation for our district. we've shared this with y'all before, but really trying to focus on how do we make sure that we are what we're calling provide equipped and empowered elementary schools. So how do we make sure that our schools are staffed adequately? And how do we make sure that our schools feel like they have the staffing they need to be able to, again, reach the goals of the strategic plan, but support our students and our families throughout the district. And then it doesn't matter which elementary school your kid goes to, that they're going to have the resources that they need at that school, whether they're a large school or a small school. So we've talked a lot about how do we make sure we have strong teams of teachers in the buildings, how do we make sure that we have a lot of supports for our students, and how do we make sure that we focus on quality facilities throughout that as well. I only share this again because I just think it's important to remind ourselves as we look at comparing ourselves to other districts, which we do for a lot of things, when we're talking about resources and how we allocate resources, it's a good reminder that while we're very appreciative of the mill and bonds that we have passed here, when you compare ourselves to other districts in the state that we use to compare ourselves to, we are one of the lowest funded districts in the state when it comes to state per pupil funding. And then when you throw on top of that the mill levy overrides, we are behind on that as well. So the importance of this to me is that we are, not only are we declining in student enrollment, which impacts funding, but we also already are underfunded compared to other districts in the state. And so that puts us behind the 8 ball. And that's a breakdown of all the data behind it that Mel put together. Big one there at the bottom is just if you start averaging those things out, those districts have about an average of $9,266 per student, and you can see where we are right above that. So we're below the average for those districts, and then when you throw in the per pupil mill levy override, we're behind by about $1,000 per student, and then you can see when you put those two together, we're behind over $1,000 per kid when you throw that funding in there. Okay, so a couple updates. One, we did have town hall meetings. The only things I want to mention about that is we had, again, an in-person meeting on the 29th of June. We had about 50 people show up to that meeting. And then we had a Facebook Live meeting on the 5th. And I think that's been viewed by, I don't know, a couple thousand people. And it lives on our Facebook. So if folks want to go back and watch that, it's the same presentation that we gave at all three of them. So that lives on the page if you want to go watch that. And then this is an old slide that I pulled in, but we had that last in-person meeting already in July. The plan was for us to have an opportunity to discuss the data, for folks to be able to provide feedback they had note cards, they had a survey we did at the end, tried to provide some time for some table discussions, but it was a lot of data as well, as very data rich. And the intended audience, again, was families and staff and community who maybe haven't been as engaged in this process. Going back to our original charge from the board was to try to find a way to better educate the community on the issues that we're dealing with. So that was the target audience for these meetings, was if you don't know what's going on around declining enrollment, it was an opportunity to provide that data and then to talk about the work of the committee. And then we shared that we compiled all the feedback from the surveys and from the note cards, and we provided that information to the committee for them to be able to review. So meetings 5, 6, and 7 have really all been focused on talking about criteria. If we were to move forward with any sort of consolidation or closure, what criteria does this committee feel like would need to be used to identify schools that would be candidates for closure or consolidation? I thought we would potentially be through this on like meeting 5 or 6. We didn't, and that's okay, because it's such an important topic. We felt like we needed more time to make sure we had enough time for the committee to discuss it, and that everybody felt comfortable with whatever criteria we come out with in the end that would be recommended. So we still are not there yet with the finalized set of criteria, but we're getting closer. And so a lot of the update I'm going to give you is that that's been the main topic of the last few meetings, because we have continued to grapple with that topic and have discussions around it. So the first time we talked about it, I should say this too. So I want to be very clear with the committee, and I'll reiterate with the board and the public. The role of the committee when it comes to the topic of consolidations and closures is not to go pick schools and come up with a list and bring it forward. And I wanted to be very clear with the committee on that, because I know there was a lot of maybe stress or worry about, I don't want to be the person who has to make the recommend a school, because I'm a teacher at this school and I don't want that to be, on my shoulders, or I'm a principal or I'm whatever. And so try to be very clear with the committee that your role is not to come up with a list. Your role is to help us identify what's on the bulleted list up here. What are the pros and cons of, if we have to go forward with consolidation or closure, what are the pros and the cons of that? What is the rationale for closure and consolidation being a viable pathway? And then help us finalize criteria. And then Paul, JB will talk a little bit about this in a second, but also coming up with some recommendations for some guiding principles on if we do have to move forward with any more closures or consolidations, what are some ways that we can best support the community that's impacted by that this time around. So that's where this committee stops when it comes to consolidation closure. They're not going to be coming up with a list, and there is no list. I talked about that with the town halls. The way we interpreted the charge from the board was that we're going to evaluate elementary schools, and so there is no list of elementary schools that are deemed for closure or consolidation. We've gone back to having that initial discussion around the data and then coming up with criteria. And if it's approved by the board, then we would then apply that criteria as a district, and we would bring forward data around that in the future. Okay. Yeah.
I know you haven't finalized it. Sorry. I know you haven't finalized anything yet, but just a flavor of what and how many.
So I have some, this is 300 slides I got to get through. Okay. I'm joking.
Here.
I do have some slides that talk a little bit about that. I don't want to list specific ones because they haven't finalized anything. So if I say they liked this one and then 2 weeks from now, all of a sudden that one's not one.
No, I understand.
But I can give kind of.
Like a flavor of, okay, this is.
We've been discussing, yeah. So just a reminder, we wanted to make sure that when we're going through this process that we have accurate data, that this process is reliable, and that it's also defendable as we move forward. These are the criteria that came from research that were recommended criteria that we could look at. So we did start with this list of criteria, along with criteria that, additional criteria that Shannon may have used the first time around. And so we started with this kind of longer list of 10, and then we've been working with the committee on, do we use all 10? Do we only use one? Do we use two? And so that's kind of where we're at now. These are some of the ones that that Shannon used, and there's some overlap there too with the criteria he used and then some of the criteria that was in research. So the first time we presented it to the committee, we talked about, we've been going a lot, we spent a lot of time going back and looking at Jeffco's process, because not only is it newer and fresher, but they also have an after-action report that's been really helpful for us. They talk about where they made mistakes and where they did things well. I actually was able to hear the superintendent from Jeffco present last week on this exact topic, and it was very interesting hearing from her. They had her board president was there as well. They had principals from schools that closed and schools that were accepting kids share kind of their journey that they went through, which was interesting as well. But a lot of that data is in that after-action report. And then again, we reviewed some other data as well. And the question we asked to the committee was, what criteria seems most objective? What criteria seems appropriate for our community? And then what unintended consequences might a certain criteria entail? And we walked them through a process of green, yellow, and red dots, basically putting that criteria up on the wall and saying, which ones do you think are most viable? Which ones do you think could possibly work? And then which ones do you feel like, no, there's no way this is a good criteria for us to use? And then folks were able to provide feedback and comments to that as well from the committee, so we could look at it. We took that initial feedback that we got through this process, and we brought it back to the committee. And the way it came out the first time around was there were tiers to it. So there was a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3. And tier 1 was essentially the way we were looking at applying it was take all your elementary schools, apply the tier 1 criteria, and if it comes out to the amount of schools that we're going to consolidate or close, then go with that. But if you end up with 12 schools, then you go to tier 2 criteria and you apply that criteria to those 12. And then if you need to use tier 3. So at first we were looking at it as a tiered system in that way that you may not apply all of them, but you're applying them as you need to. That has shifted, and I'll talk about that in a second through some of the conversations we had with the committee. I started talking about things already put on the slide. So criteria, again, were tiered based on the results of that prioritization activity. We then sent a survey out to the committee after that initial meeting, and we asked them if they agreed with the tiers of consolidation criteria that was presented, and if a particular criteria should be moved from a different tier and why. So we got a lot of feedback from the committee then too, saying, well, even though this one may have seemed like from the amount of green dots, the amount of comments that it should be tier 1, I actually think it should be tier 2, and here's why. So we gathered more data from the committee on what tier they felt like criteria should fall in. The results of that survey were reviewed at our meeting number 6, and the committee members had time to discuss the results of that survey and the comments. So and that again was a Google survey. We compiled the results and all the comments that everybody put, and we had some facilitated discussions at their tables around what are you seeing in the results from that survey and what your fellow committee members are mentioning. So we presented them at that meeting also with a draft of those tiered criteria based on that survey that we sent out, and asked if they agree with the tiers. Discussion was then had at that meeting around whether we should be doing a tiered system or a weighted system. And so instead of doing what I mentioned before, where you apply tier 1, and then if you need to apply tier 2, then you do it, and if you need to apply tier 3, you do it, there was a discussion about, should we not just apply, if it's 5 criteria, should we just apply them all, but give different weights to them? So that still would all those criteria would still be applied to every school, but one criteria might hold more weight than another one. So we sent out another survey to the committee. I think they're tired of me surveying them. And we asked them those questions. Should it be tiered or should it be a weighted system? If it's a tiered system, what criteria belongs in what tier? If it's a weighted system, what weight would you give to it? Rank these criteria in order. And so that's what this talks about. So survey was sent out following meeting 6. We asked them those questions. I will say that 100% preferred a weighted system. So that before, when we were talking about tiers, the committee actually is more in favor of a weighted system. So whatever that finalized criteria is, they want them all applied, but they want them applied in a weighted system. So one piece of criteria might matter more than another piece of criteria, but they're all still applied in the end.
Determine that.
And that's what we've been discussing with them. So we asked the committee members to apply weights to the 10 criteria by ranking them in order of importance. And they also could say, I don't think this criteria should be applied at all. So I might think building adequacy should be number 1. Like, I care a lot about how that facility functions, but I don't like this other criteria, so I'm not even gonna give it a weight. And so some folks weighted all of them, some people only weighted 5, and the other 5 they didn't think should belong at all. And so we took that from the results, and what I brought back to them at the last meeting is that 4th bullet. 7 of the 10 criteria received over half of the committee's support for using it. So over 50% of the committee members said, I think this criteria it belongs and it deserves a weight. They may have given it different weights, but they at least thought it should belong. 3 of the 10 criteria, less than half the committee members gave it a weight. So over 50% said, I don't think this should be included at all as a criteria. And the results of that survey, we did discuss them at meeting 7, which was last week. And we are sending out a survey again this week to the group to try to get an idea of, are we saying that these are the 7? And this is how they should be weighted. And the way we applied that was I took the way that they ranked them and came up with averages to try to figure out how they should be weighted. And so we're sending all that out to the committee, asking them to say, yeah, I think these 7 should be the criteria, and these are the weights. I agree with it, yes. No, I don't, and here's why. And then we're going to bring it back to the next meeting, and talk about it. So that's why I don't have actual criteria, but I will say we've had a lot of discussion around those 10. And I would say right now, again, I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to speak for the committee and we haven't made anything final, but there's at least 7 of those 10 that are getting majority support from the committee to use. And so we'll have that discussion moving forward.
Just have a question. Earlier on one of your earlier slides, you were talking about Jeffco, and they had what they learned from what they did to help guide them in the future. Is there, and this was brought up in one of our earlier board meetings back in the spring, is there some weight that we would look at what's been going on or what will go on with the East closure and the kids going to the various schools and using that to help this process too? Or I know the timelines don't jive, but that would seem to be good information we could gather before we set sail. If that's what they did in Jeffco, it sounds like they pulled from what they did and how they learned from it and moved on. Are we accounting for that, or
Yeah, so I would,
does that make sense?
yeah, my initial response to that would be, we have learned a lot through that process. I think even when we trying to support the school through the closure, we've learned some things that we did well and some things we did not do well. And that's not putting blame on anybody. We've got departments that have worked really hard to try to support the school through that closure. But I think if they were all sitting up here too, they'd say, yeah, through that process, we've learned some things that we would want to do differently next time. That's part of the activity that Paul's going to share a little bit about in a second, that we're also charging this committee with, is based on what you've heard from the community, our community, based on what you've read in the research, after action reports, and then based on just the knowledge that you bring to the committee, what are some things that you'd like to see us do maybe differently next time? And I'm kind of getting into Paul's section, but we broke it up into 4 categories of how do we best support our students through a transition? How do we best support our staff? How do we best support our families? And then how do we support the community surrounding that school or schools? And so to answer your question, yeah, I think we learned a lot from the East closure through just going through that process ourselves. And we don't have we didn't hire anybody like Jeffco did to go write a report, but we definitely have a lot of information that we've learned from that process that we will take into account when we're moving forward, if we do move forward with another closure and consolidation. And again, we're trying to lean on the committee members to give us feedback on what they'd like to see done differently as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that? So that's a great question, Doug. I think my question, the way that I heard that question was slightly different. I think for me, our understanding of why we closed East and what we accomplished in closing East, I went back through every one of the meetings that preceded the vote to close East, and I took notes about what we said we would accomplish when we closed East. So specifically, there was, a couple very long presentations depicting our staffing model and how we would, if we closed a school, the receiving schools would have smaller class sizes and more course offerings, and the numerical monetary value that we would save. And so one of my big questions, and we can get to kind of the bigger questions at the end of this, but one of my big questions is, all right, so that's so funny. I'm watching the thing and I saw it just switch over to my name tag, but our main points were, the money we would save and then the impacts to students, again, smaller class sizes specifically, and more program offerings. And so I'm curious about those learnings. And when we look at East, before we closed it, and now all the receiving schools, I'm curious specifically about exactly how much money we have saved, exactly how much smaller are the classes, and exactly how many more course offerings have we provided. And I obviously have a lot of information about that, but I think those are my questions. What have been our lessons learned in terms of what have we actually accomplished? And, and then that gets to the bigger question. So 2 questions. Again, what exactly is our goal? What does success even look like? And did we achieve that success when we closed East? And what exactly did that look like?
So it's a good question. I think I need some clarity though, or from the board, because smaller class sizes. So when we
that was let me just say really quick, in 2 different meetings, specifically the February 27th meeting, there was 10 minutes dedicated to it, starting at minute 29, discussing the staffing model, how we would end up with smaller class sizes. So I was just reiterating what we were told.
Okay. So I'll have to go back and review that then, because I remember when we looked at our numbers, especially at the elementary level, we were having conversations around some schools have 13 kids in a class, and have really small classes, and how that's not sustainable for a district, to be able to have classes that size. So we had conversations about sometimes through this process, you're going to end up actually having class sizes that are more, I want to say normal, through potentially going through a avenue of this. So the goal of having smaller class sizes, again, I'll go back and watch that meeting, but I don't know that that was something that we had discussed. And if we did, or there's confusion around that, then I definitely want to clarify that. But that would be like
was
right now when we're looking
articulated-
at elementary schools, we have some elementary schools that have really small classes. I don't think we're talking about closures and consolidations in order to make those even smaller than they already are.
I guess so the staffing model that we looked at was specifically elementary schools.
Okay.
And it was specifically a situation where, here's our current staffing model, here's our current student population, and if we close schools, what around that school would be impacted. So it was elementary schools, and that was, and literally 10 minutes was spent on how that would happen. So I hear what you're saying, but that wasn't what was brought to us. So what I'm understanding you to be saying is that we expect larger class sizes when we close schools.
No, I wouldn't say larger. Yeah, go ahead.
The other piece of that, as I recall, was in the schools that would have larger class sizes because maybe there were only 2 third grade teachers that we could staff in those schools. So their class sizes were on the larger size. Whereas if we right-sized the entire school a bit more, then that would allow possibly for a third teacher in that grade to come in. And now you've downsized
Correct.
the size of the classes.
Yeah, that was exactly what was
Yeah,
presented.
so, and that's,
That was major.
I'm glad you clarified that. So yes, you are accurate that could also be something that happens. You could have schools that have abnormally small classes, not have abnormally small classes, which again, it impacts staffing because then you're staffing really small classes. But yes, you're right. We did have that discussion about if you have a really small number of rounds at a school at a grade level, that this could potentially provide an opportunity to be able to more evenly spread the kids out across more classes and make those classes not as large, which it's harder to do when you have a smaller student enrollment and less teachers. So yes, I'm glad y'all clarified that because that is something that we discussed. You're right.
Yeah, and so I think my question is, I'm so curious to find out. So, and just a little bit of background here is I have been asking this question now for a couple of months, and what I believe to be the case based on the information we have available is that for all the surrounding middle schools around East, all of the class sizes across the board increased. And so, and again, we don't actually have the final numbers. I'm waiting for the final numbers, but that was an estimate. And so not my estimate. And so my question is, so these goals again that we had that were articulated in these meetings that I went back and verified today, that have we achieved any of those goals? Where are we at in achieving those goals? And so again, if we anticipated smaller class sizes and we got only larger class sizes, that goal seems to maybe not to have been achieved. If we anticipated additional programming and we know that there were no more course offerings at any of those middle schools, that goal was not achieved. I'm still curious about the final numbers and how much money we saved compared to what we were initially projected to save in those initial meetings. So again, it gets back to this question of what exactly are we trying to accomplish? What are our metrics? And how did closing East accomplish those metrics? So as we move forward with the potential for closing more schools, what was accomplished? What was not accomplished? And as we're tailoring more solutions, if our goals were not accomplished, then we need to radically reconsider what we're doing here in accomplishing our goals, or reconsider how to accomplish those goals.
Personally, I think that, I mean, those are good questions, but it's one of those things that you really can't judge in a month. I mean, we just closed school, finished school May, June, July, and we're in August. So I think it's something that we look at, later down the road to see where we're at. We won't know what kind of goals we accomplished if we haven't given it a chance to. So we just closed schools, they just finished up, they just had their summer. You can't look and say, well, that was successful, because we don't know. So all these other kids.
Yeah, that's my question. What are the data? So we said these were the goals we would accomplish, and we do have data. So like, where exactly are we at relative to those benchmarks? But you're right, Will, I think that's a great point. What else will be achieved over time? We don't know, but we can and we should and we must ask those questions right now before we make any additional decisions.
The other thing I just want to state is that in addition to the upside being those things, we're also, the goal was to not have to cut staff any further and make these schools any more lean staff-wise than they already were. Plus, the possibility of having to look at, maybe we haven't added additional programs, but we've been able to sustain the programs that we've had and keep those strong and viable.
Yeah, and these are all really good conversations. I think, so what I'm hearing too is that we want to make sure that if we do have to go this route again, that we make sure that we feel like we're making decisions that the full board supports and that the community can get behind. But also, I think this may lead to some discussions around, like when we say small class, or we're going to make a small class or a class smaller or larger, we don't really have as a district cuts. Like we don't have anything in policy that says a middle school class should be this size, an elementary class should be this size. So that may be something we want to have a discussion in the future about as well, is are there goals that we're trying to meet around class sizes as a district, because we don't have those currently. We have what we try to keep them around, but that's not actually something that's a policy or necessarily a on-paper procedure for the district. So yeah, if we say we're going to make classes smaller, but smaller because we're trying to get to a certain number per class, or not, because right now we don't actually have those benchmarks, so that may be something we want to discuss moving forward as well. Oh yeah.
So in summary, it sounds like, okay, so you're meeting with the committee, you're coming up with criteria. See if I've got this right. I'm just making sure I understand. So if someone asks me, I could say, this is what's going on. So this committee is coming up with criteria. They're not making a decision or recommendation on particular schools. They're just saying, if we go this route, here are the criteria you all, the board, needs to look at, correct? So my question is, so we have this tool, so to speak, in the toolbox, ready to use when needed. So is there a discussion in the committee or someplace else that triggers us going to that toolbox to okay, we have a plan, we've had a committee work on this for months, here's what we're going to use. Is there a trigger that unlocks that door or that cabinet, so we pull that out, that says when this happens, DEFCON 6, right, we got to go use this tool? Because what happened this time last year or last fall or this past winter, situations change, right? They'll probably change in the next 6 months. Either we'll find out with student enrollment numbers this fall where we are. So my question is, has that been thought about too? Or we haven't really ever talked about that as a board, and I know the new board will want to talk about that. When do we jump that cliff to make that decision? Does that make sense?
No, it does, and it's a good discussion to have. So we have behind the scenes been working on trying to project out if we were to, well, two things. One, if we were to actually staff our elementary schools where we think they should be staffed appropriately, what does that mean for all 25 schools, and what financially would that mean? How much add would that be to the budget to do that? So I know Paul and Mel have been working on that. And then also projecting out, based on projections, if they're accurate, how much longer, how many potentially schools would you need to consolidate in order to help us reach those goals that we have around staffing with the finances that we do have, the budget that we do have? So we have been having those discussions, and that's something we would want to bring forward to the board to say, when we're running these numbers, this is what we're looking at. We're not there yet. We also aren't even through the committee, and
Sure,
so,
no.
and I know you understand that. I just, so much attention has been focused on how do we make sure that we have something to bring back to the board in September. That's part of the reason why we've shifted to having it presented in the form of a report, because not only do we want to give the background information on how we got here, we also want to explain why these 5 pathways that the committee's been discussing are viable options to look at. And then also, are these things that the board can get behind and support? So for consolidations and closures, I envision that what's being brought in September is really, the first step is to see, are these even criteria that the board can support if we have to move forward with that? Because we don't want to go apply those and start having that discussion if the board's like, no, I don't like those criteria. It's different than how Jeffco did theirs. So Jeffco actually passed a policy around this. They created a policy on school closures and consolidations. And so it's in writing, and then they have a yearly review that they do every year. They have to do it by June 30th, I think, and they have to come to the board and say, here's the state of our enrollment as a district, and then they have criteria and things laid out that they can use. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to go down the route of a policy, but I at least want to be able to make sure that in September, if the board feels like they can support the findings of this committee, so that if we do have to move forward with those things, that that we have criteria set, and then we can do the work on the back end to try to investigate that further.
Well, it just seems to me, I mean, the work is outstanding and lots of effort, there's no doubt. Lots of questions, you answer one question and 5 more come up, I know that. It sounds like a good foundational piece, but in and of itself, it's not a whole answer. I think the broader questions, like you talked about, we don't have a policy. I think we used to years ago on class sizes. What should it be for K2? We used to have, I think it was, if I remember correctly, was 20 or under K2, and then 3, 4, 5 was 24, and then middle school. I wasn't in the middle school realm, but it was 25 or whatever it may be. But the point was there was some guidance there on what we were shooting for. And as you said, that's not a policy that we have. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, I don't know. But this type of thing could be the same thing, is what triggers us, the board, whatever that board may be, 2 years from now or 5 years from now, to use these tools that we've already done the work on how we will go about choosing schools for consolidation or closure or whatever. So my broader point is, I think Carrie and everybody else has brought up some good questions that, ultimately, what are we trying to achieve in anything we're doing, right? But in this case, if you're closing a school or consolidating, what is it we're trying to achieve? Is it, again, you mentioned just a moment ago, is it a financial issue? Is it a delivery system? Are we providing the best for our kids and teachers, that kind of thing? And again, you know all this. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it just seems the effort you're putting through with your committee is great, slow and steady, and I would just recommend that same process. If there is anything urgent ahead, we have some good time to spend to answer these questions before a trigger has to be pulled.
Well, and I mentioned earlier learning experiences through all this, and even back when we got the recommendations from Shannon, I've learned a lot about how to make sure that the board is provided with things, and we have more time to talk to the community about the implications with that. So I agree with everything you're saying. We've learned a lot through this first process. The other thing that we're having a conversation around is, once we finalize this criteria, and it's something that ideally the board will support, we have to make sure that we have the data to apply the criteria. And do we have reliable, accurate data that we can stand behind to make sure that we bring something forward to the board, whenever that is, to say we can stand behind these things, and we believe applying it this way comes up with these schools. And we've also looked at trying to run the numbers on, is it 1 school, is it 3 schools? So that's all still work that we're looking into. So, and I'm glad you mentioned the work of the committee, because I didn't mention at the beginning, there's a lot of folks have dedicated a lot of time and effort and hours into this. And so I am really appreciative of all the folks that have been able to make it to the meetings.
Well, and I tell you, you just said something that was really just the clearest thing is that you agree with everything that I say, and that's really.
For the record, I did not say that. All right, next slide.
Well, so wait.
You got that?
Before we move on,
Just teasing.
before we move on, I just want to say that we've kind of danced around this for a while, but I want to know when we will know what exactly our goals are here. So again, like, are we trying to meet some budgetary requirement? Are we trying to meet a staffing requirement for next year? Are we trying to look out a couple of years? Like, what exactly are we trying to accomplish in this discussion of declining enrollment? What is our exact metric? So we can go back and say, yes, we did or didn't accomplish that. And then also, what did we think our metric was for East, and did we accomplish it? I want to know when we will know those two things.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we have to, so yes, and I think the information that Mel and Paul have been putting together is something we can bring back to the board and discuss that I think will help shine some light on that. The other thing we have to keep in mind here is that we're not making a plan to try to just fix a problem for next school year. We're actually trying to make a plan that's going to help us over the next however long we continue to see a decline in enrollment. And even the state demographer said that it's going to take at least 12 years to get back to pre-pandemic numbers. So not only what impact is it having immediately, but what impact do we think it's going to have down the road for us, and how are we planning for the next 12 years? Because again, we're already down 1,200 kids. Those are real numbers, and the projections are showing that we're going to continue to decline at least for the next Shannon's numbers said the next 7 years. The state demographer showed a trough that we would hit in the next couple years around birth rates, and then it's going to gradually go up. But that's, again, I know you already know this, but she's talking about in-migration. We're talking about what else might happen in our community in that time period. Are there going to be other competing schools that open up that will pull kids from the district? So those are all factors that we have to think about, and so we're trying to come up with a plan that ideally, yes, it can help us in the immediate, but also is going to help us down the road, because I don't really want to bring this back to the board, 4 or 5 years down the road and have to do this all over again. Ideally, we wouldn't have to do that. Where's the sweet spot that does allow us to make sure that we are in a good financial place where we can continue to fund priorities that we have set as a district? One of those main ones being around paying our staff better. But then also, how do we make sure that we are staffing our buildings? And I keep saying adequately, but how do we make sure that we actually staff our buildings properly? And it doesn't matter what school that your kid goes to, they're going to have robust staff that they need at that building, and we're not shortchanging schools based on the number of kids that they have in those buildings. So yeah, they're good questions. I think some more, definitive goals written down would be good for us. And again, that's stuff that, looking at other models, other boards put that out clearly to say these are the things that we expect our schools to have, and we have not done that here. And so I think that needs to be part of the discussion moving forward.
Yeah, and to be clear, I agree. I asked for a policy to be developed months ago about this. So yes, I also think that makes a lot of sense, and I look forward to that as well.
Okay.
I just want to, I guess my take on it is I feel like it's been clear about what we've been trying to achieve, which is, and some of it is a little bit of a moving target, because we've been talking about our staffing model, which even prior to declining enrollment, we've had struggles with staffing, not just adequately, but we've had trouble staffing. Two is the funding that we have had the issue with is ESSER dollars are stopping. Those will not return. Our 5-year funding average is coming to an end. And, we may or may not get more monies from the state. That's the one that I guess could be a variable. But I would think that if we were faced with just some of those things, those would be triggers for us to justify looking at all of these things that we've got the committee set forth looking at. And so I guess my thought Doug, into kind of, I get what you're saying is, what's the precipice, what's that first domino that has to fall that gets the rest of this going? I kind of feel like that's already kind of started. And so what we wanted to do was take a pause to see what criteria we wanted to establish so that we weren't put in the situation with East again where we had to find almost 18 FTE to cut, this next year. So I guess I view it a little differently in that it'd be nice if we could find something super exact. I don't know that this demography is not exact, birth rates aren't exact. I mean, people move in and out of communities, it's not exact. But I think that we've already got some large indicators that are showing that we've got to move forward with something in order to make sure that our district isn't just surviving, but that we can be thriving. And I think that's something we can all agree on, is that we're looking to pay our staff well. We're looking to provide programming and resources for our students that aren't just adequate, but like Dr. Hill said, that are stellar. And so in order to do those types of things, a lot of that takes money. So I guess I kind of viewed it a little differently. I feel like those things have already been in place, and we got to keep, now we're just trying to find the guidelines of how we want to implement what that process is going to look like in a maybe more cleaner way than what has happened prior to, so.
That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not saying there hasn't been great thought in all these things, and there haven't been concerns and issues that prompted us to get where we passed the resolution. What I'm trying to say is, for future boards and future superintendent, whoever has a foundational document or guidelines or recommendations that trigger, I hate to always use that word, but
Absolutely.
we know what we're talking about, to put things in action, that we can say, it doesn't mean they can't be modified or adjusted. And you just reeled off a whole lot of things of consideration, right? That were looked at and probably should be looked at in the future, and there may be some other things too. That's all I was.
And on the flip side, with having some kind of a system to guide us as into the future, there may be, hopefully a day where we're growing, and what would also trigger those events that we would need to, or, triggering events that would cause us to look at, do we need to?
There you go.
Additional school or something like that. And there just haven't been guidelines. I think when we came into especially when Dr. Hill came into this, the problem was already there and had been living there for a while. It's just that there were none of those triggering events, possibly, that caused people to take a look at it until we were up against running out of ESSER funds and our 5-year average funding changing.
But that's a fantastic point, because it is looking at the flip side, and I go no further than down the road where I live out in Fruita. We built a $25 million school, right? At the time, and I was on the board we needed that 3 days ago, and now we have a $25 million school we built that is well under capacity. That's no one's fault. It was good thinking. But again, to your point, what are those triggers that prompted us to make that decision at the time? And we did consider a lot of things, but maybe there were other things we should have looked at too. Maybe,
Sure.
Even if we did, maybe we would have come up with the same decision as a school board back then. But it's those kinds of things. Your point is just spot on. It's looking at both sides of that. If things are
Just, I think any work that we can do now, since we're in the middle of it and going through it right now, anything that we can do to alleviate the pain that happens when you have to move quickly.
That's right.
I'd be willing to do that work now, so that somebody didn't come up against that.
Well, and to that point, in 2014, the district consolidated Lincoln Park Elementary and, was it Columbus? Or what was the other? Columbine?
It was
Elementary?
it was Columbine and Lincoln Park.
Yeah, right, and then that became the new Chipeta. And so, and again, I think the work of this committee and what we're doing here is really good criteria for us to establish in knowing, what do we need to do when that happens again. And so I think, COVID, good or bad, I think has taught us all a lot that there can obviously, something can come out of left field and kind of whack us all over the head, and we're not prepared for it. So I think what we're doing now is just really looking forward, like you said, both to either growth or decline of what we can do, and we can just have a better prepared plan moving forward. And so I think the work, I appreciate this committee. I know our staff is not getting paid any extra to be here, the extra hours, and for the board members that are, liaisons to the committee and our community members that are volunteering their time. I think this work will be very impactful for, years to come, for the district to now have kind of a guiding light or standard when it comes to these tough decisions in the future, so.
And I hope nothing I said took.
Oh, absolutely not.
Because I think that's the kind of work,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we should have been doing years and years and years,
Absolutely.
ago, because it's really foundational.
A lot easier.
Just like the strategic plan that's a
Yes.
foundational document that we can, anchor to. And the same thing here. This is our anchor to make decisions in the future. So.
Being part of that committee and being at all of those meetings, I do believe that work is being done, and it will be. I mean, they really dig deep, and have come up with some great ideas and just some perspective on all of those different, criteria that we're considering.
So I skipped past some slides because I already started talking about them, so sorry, Paul. You're probably okay not having to come up here. So just the ending of the last meeting, Paul walked the committee through an activity where I mentioned earlier, coming up with some input and ideas around if we have to move forward with a closure or consolidation in a community. What are some things that the committee wants to make sure that we keep in mind when we're supporting students through that transition, staff, families, and community surrounding the schools? And so committee members gave input on that, and we'll bring that back to the next meeting as well and have discussions around it. The other thing I just want to mention, closing this out, is just the way I mentioned earlier that we're going to present it in a report. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about closures, consolidations. There are 4 other pathways that the committee has said they feel like are viable pathways to also explore. And so I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of those. The reason why so much time is being spent on the closure and consolidation criteria is because we don't have that already established. We don't have a committee that already exists in the district that tackles that. And so we're really leaning on this committee to help us come up with those criteria. But there are 4 other pathways that will also be recommended to the board moving forward. And those are, this is the format of the report, would be an executive summary, how we're connecting all this work to the strategic plan, what the challenge was, what our charge was, or what the challenge is, I should say, what the charge is, this idea of equipped and empowered schools, and then what are those pathways that the committee has asked us to further explore. The pathways, these 5 pathways that we've been talking about, and we're going to spend more time with the committee in the upcoming meetings on pathways 2 through 5. We just haven't been able to give them as much attention. But consolidation is obviously one of them, but there was also an appetite for exploring mill levy or a mill levy override to try to address some of these needs. We also have had conversations around how do we make sure that we take stock not only of the innovative programs and options we already have, but is there something else that maybe we should be exploring that could not only attract families and students, but retain any students or families that might be thinking about leaving the district? So how do we make sure that we are being competitive and make sure that we are offering the things that our families want in our school district, so they don't have to feel like they can go look, or they need to look somewhere else? The 4th pathway was further analysis on if we were to receive additional per pupil funding from the state, do we need to use some of that to help address this problem? We're not going to get into that discussion tonight, obviously, but there's pros and cons with that, and that'll come out in the report. If you get additional funding, do you put it towards other priorities in the district, or is this something that the board would want to put that money towards, or maybe some of it towards teacher raises and some towards this problem? So that's another pathway. And then the last one is just this ongoing evaluation of our central office staffing, our programs that essentially where we put our dollars outside of the school buildings. Some of these things are obviously to support schools, but are there other areas that we might need to look to potentially find some savings? And we've had that conversation before about, and I know the priority area, looking at resource allocation is talked about, like a program audit or program evaluation, cost-benefit analysis of where we're spending dollars in the district. So that is another of the 5 pathways that the committee has talked about exploring. So just to close us off, we have one more meeting, or excuse me, we have another meeting on the 14th. Ideally, but I said this at the last 2 meetings, but ideally we'll be able to come to some sort of a resolution around criteria so that we can move into talking about those 4 other pathways a little bit more, and then have some time for the committee to be able to review a draft of the recommendation report and provide any feedback. And then ideally we can bring that report to the board in September to be able to have a discussion around it. And then ideally, the board would take a vote to support the findings from that committee report. But again, we still have a lot of work to do, and we are running out of time on this, but we've got some time still, and we're working through this, and so we're looking forward to bringing something to y'all in September, okay? So that's the end of that one. Sorry, Paul, again, that I made you sit there and you didn't have to say anything.
Thank you for that update.
Can I just say one thing? I was really trying to digest, trying to understand what people's thoughts were about our goals. And President Heights, I really appreciate you kind of taking a step back and ticking through your understanding. That also was my understanding. And so presumably, if, when this first came to our attention, we thought that we might have about like $1.9 million in savings by closing East once we got Shannon's recommendation. And so, and if we have a, $3 million shortfall, if our goal is shoring up that shortfall specifically, then, it makes sense that we would be able to like piece these little pieces of the budget together to all build up to that. And so then the first question must be, exactly how much money did we save in closing East? Or approximately how much money do we think we saved in closing East? And then, how does that translate to that strategy creating success for us? So yes, that is also my understanding, among many other things that were articulated. And my question is like, how exactly did we do against all of those goals? So thank you for clarifying that.
Hey, Carrie, are you firm on that number? Because I thought it was 1.3.
I looked through the slides today and it was 1.875 or something. And it was 17 FTE from East and then 5 other FTE from other schools. And I don't recall what that additional 5 was. But yes, that number was presented to us in 3 different meetings.
And I know Mel's sent me some information that I'll send out to the board and a board response around trying to answer that question in particular.
Thank you. And any other goals that we had. So yes, that question in particular, and then the class sizes, the additional programs. Those were the goals that I really, those are the 3 goals that I pulled out of all of re-listening to all of those meetings again. But maybe there were other goals that, folks had that weren't articulated. But the point is, that was my understanding. I want to know how we did against them, and if those are still our goals, and how do we tailor solutions to that.
Yeah, sounds good. I think it'd be great to know too, like, maybe some outcomes we'll see that were positive, and maybe some other things that were challenges as we kind of go through this next year as well. I think things that we just weren't even aware of would be, and I'm sure you've got your staff on that, Dr. Hill, just to kind of know positives and challenges that we may face too.
That's a great point, because through this, there could have been some outcomes that no one anticipated.
Right, we didn't
That's
expect.
be great, and certainly ones, we focus on the ones that didn't, but, that's a good point.
All right, move into our Grand Junction High School construction update, if that team wants to come forward.
I need.
Okay, we're gonna take a quick 5-minute break, breather, while they come up and get the slides set up. Yeah. Our 5-minute time for a break, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, there was that. Really? Really interesting. Maybe it was existing. Okay. Okay.
Alrighty, we are going to hear from our Grand Junction High School team, I guess, on our progress update. So if you guys wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves again so people at home or in the audience can just remember who's who. That'd be great. So take it away.
Is it on or not?
Is the light on? There you go.
Okay. All right. Hello, board. I'm Colleen Caneda with Dynamic Program Management. We're the owner's representative for the Grand Junction High School construction project. And with me today, we have Eddie Mort with Facilities and Micah Adams with DPM also. And then here in the crowd, we have Peter Eisnogel with BG & Co., Ray Scott with DPM, and Mark Litzen with FCI Constructors, in case you have any questions for the team. We are here to do our progress update on the project. The high level here with some of these metrics are that we've just kind of hit over the 40% mark in expenditure and in schedule. And we've expended just over $62 million out of the $144.5 million budget. Something to note here is that 42.9% of that is has been here spent here locally within district boundaries, which is just over 68%, I believe, of all the dollars spent. And we are still working towards opening school for students about a year from now when they'll be coming back. We have some photos here continuing on the vertical construction. And we have a flyby, so that'll be probably a better image for you when we get to that slide. We have recently completed the furniture procurement, and we have 3 contracts in progress for 3 different vendors to supply the furniture, 2 of which are local companies. And we are currently bidding the asbestos abatement for the larger school building. We did a little bit of abatement that we could get to this summer. But the bigger package for abatement is out to bid right now for that work to be completed next summer. If you at the top of your screen there on the left, that's the classroom wing, which is the 2-story wing. There's a lot of mostly all drywalled. They're working from the 1st floor to the 3rd, and the 3rd floor is starting some drywall now. And then on the 1st floor, they've actually been doing interior painting, and some cabinets are being installed on that side. And then kind of working towards the right side of your screen with the gymnasium and performing arts areas, will be following the completion of the finishes in the classroom area. We have a few other photos. If you have not yet taken a tour lately, please feel free to reach out to anyone on the team, probably through Eddie. We can get you out there for a tour. We're going to start doing staff tours for the Grand Junction High School staff on Thursday afternoons again once school is back in session, or Thursday, 5 o'clock. There's some metrics here. I think that having, somewhere between 250 to 300 workers on site each day getting work in place is pretty significant. And we've had quite a few of those are local workers here. And they've been working really hard through some pretty brutal heat out there and still, doing a lot of getting productivity in place. And I mean, just definitely respect for all those workers who are out there working, in, especially this summer. And I think we're ready for the drone video link. Micah chose the music.
Music got one on there?
Oh, that one. Next. I think someone on FCI staff does the drone. I could just put it to music.
Listen to Grant section, EJ talking.
I don't know if you may have missed it, but there was a fading transition between the two videos. Yeah, it was me.
I think Micah's going to stay in project management, not video production. So with that, what questions can we answer for the board today?
These meetings have been this fun, so have a little fun isn't a bad thing. Now, I just want to say that every time I go through this project, it's just impressive. It's amazing. Our community, I think, is going to be really excited to start seeing some of those finished products. And just the amount of work, I've been going to the OAC meetings every week, every Tuesday since the beginning of the project. Andrea's gone the last couple of times because I had some conflict with my schedule. The amount of just attention to detail and really being good stewards of our community's dollars and how they're being spent, staying in budget in this particular time is not an easy feat. So I just want to shout out to everybody that works so hard, making sure that we're making good choices and making sure that we continue to be good stewards of our community's dollars.
Awesome. Board members have any other questions?
I'm not a board member, but so I'm breaking protocol. You said that we can do tours. Remind me again, I know at one point we want to get like folks that worked on the campaign and other folks in there. Was there a timeline of when y'all thought that would be good for them to be able to come in and see it? I know right now it's hard to imagine everything that's inside the building, but when would be a good time we could start setting those up?
I think there's a lot to see right now to kind of visualize all the volumes of the spaces. I think FCI is preferring that some of them happen around 5 o'clock just so that we're not interfering too much with the work that's getting done. So I think if maybe just reach out to Eddie and we can coordinate some groups and some times and remind everybody what they should be wearing.
I was looking at Dr. Christensen too, because I'm like, we got to schedule this. Okay.
Awesome, good job.
Great. Thank you guys so much. It looks great.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, I'll be looking at you for the next video. We'll talk.
I guess I should give sort of a premise of why we were laughing so hard. I don't know if those at home could hear what was going on, but Micah was touting his videography skills between the fade, between the videos, and it was humorous.
And
so.
the music.
And his choice of music for the video, so. We're not going to spend our budget on music license rights for some sort of popular song, so we'll take what we can get. So thank you guys for that. It was awesome. Yeah, and for the community, if you drive by there, obviously you've seen it. You've seen the progress. If not, drive by there. It's probably do that before school starts this next week. But it's pretty cool to see the progress over there. So, all right. So. Now we have open board discussion. I do have one item. We are going to be resuming with our board coffees. So board, is there a particular day or Saturday of the month that works for us? Bridget and Amy were wanting to be able to get some of those on the calendar. So I'm kind of open to whatever. Do we want to keep them on Saturdays, Saturday mornings? Okay. Is the second Saturday of the month, third Saturday of the month good? What? The second Saturday? Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Okay, and good to still try to meet like in some of our schools. I think that's worked really well. I think that's given people some opportunity to see our buildings.
Well, and it allows us to reach different parts of the community, so
Right,
maybe somebody
across-
can't go all the way across town, but they
Yeah.
can. we'll hit those
So
areas.
Bridget and Amy, if you guys can kind of look at where we were like last year, and we'll just kind of keep making our way around and see what buildings or places we have availability for. So let's just plan the second Saturday for each month. We'll see what those Saturdays look like and go up through April, because starting in September, yes, thank you, because August, we've all got to get our bearings underneath us to get going, and everybody's getting ready for school. So we'll start those board coffees again in September, second Saturday, usually in the morning, goes from 9 to 11, and that's just a great time for conversation with the board, because at our business meeting, we do take public comment, but we don't typically respond to the public at that time. So this is just a nice time for the board to converse with the public, so.
And it's
Okay.
something that I kind of want the board to kind of kick around a little bit, or maybe just have an idea. I thought that, our copies are good for, the adults and everything, so maybe we can kind of figure out something to add for, for our students or something, or just our youth, maybe donuts with the board or something, just to get their perspective on things and see how things are going in the district and different things, just something to kick around to maybe, just because sometimes they don't want to speak at a meeting, or they feel intimidated to speak at a meeting or something, so maybe if something a little more personal, a little more,
Well, and I would always encourage students on our regular board coffees. It's not just for the adults in the community, it's for the entire community.
Right.
So they are more than welcome to also come to the regular board coffees and talk about whatever it is they want to talk about.
Well, I was gonna throw out too, I don't know if kids wanna go to coffees on Saturdays, but, maybe we can talk to, I have my superintendent student advisory groups that I meet with quarterly. So maybe there's an opportunity for a board member wants to come to one of those, and, cause they're usually for about an hour or so, and if there's topics we want them to share with the board, y'all could come and join me at one of those. And I was doing them last year at the 4 comprehensives and R5, so, if you don't have kids showing up, that might be another avenue is to come along with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, I was just, the other thought I had was maybe we could just try to coordinate with the five larger high schools, and, and if any of the district charters or anybody else wants to invite the board out, if some students want to have a conversation. I mean, those invitations are always open. I know we can at least get a couple of us out, to those. So as long as we post them, we just want to make sure that the public knows that, 2 or more board members could potentially be there, but that they would be open. So I think it's great to be able to chat with the students. So maybe we could start with Dr. Hill's student group, but I would say if any schools are wanting to have board members come and listen to students, just reach out to us. Okay, great idea.
Yeah, I love
Any-
all of.
Any other things for board
I just
or
wanted to
things
say,
that
I
we've got
love
coming up?
all of those ideas. I think that
Okay,
having
I can't think of anything. All right, well, Dr. Schultes, we hope you feel better, and we'll have I guess I don't have a motion to adjourn because it's a work session, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.